Good morning, Carol Johnson.
Good morning, Bob Ponce, my friend, my buddy.
So, my heart is heavy today. We have passed what we call a deadly milestone in this whole COVID pandemic. 500,000 plus dead from COVID in the United States, and 46,562 in New York State, 28,954 in New York City, and we're about to pass another global milestone where we're about to pass 2.5 million worldwide.
This is a it's a tough pill for a lot of us to swallow, and then yet some people still swallow it so easily. Just we've already expressed that we're sort of at a loss on how to convey this message to people to see just what we're dealing with, how serious it is, you know. And they're just not going to comply. For I mean, what does it take? More than a half of a million lives lost in New York. I mean, in the USA, senselessly, and it just goes beyond the past. I don't want to use the term administration because actually, I still say for the first time, America has had gone through a 4-year term with the office of the presidency vacant,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And now it's a new day, and this president is, doing what he can to start to fix a whole lot, or at least get a handle on a whole lot in a short time. But it falls on us. It still remains with us, you know.
Yeah. So I think it's just important that we just take this time to acknowledge the loss of family, friends, neighbors, particularly the loss of a lot of essential workers, whether they be MTA workers, doctors and nurses, police, and even, bodega workers, people who were out there, people who were driving cabs, people who were still out there working, even while many of us were quarantining and holding up and staying out of harm's way. There were people who did not have that luxury, and as a result, lost their lives. And I just, it's really important that we not only acknowledge them, but also just acknowledge ourselves. And, you know, I just feel like we haven't properly had the opportunity to grieve our loved ones, and we're still, here in February 21, we're still having these losses, um, and coming to grips with the ones from last spring. I had a friend of mine call me up um, a few days ago, and it was just a talk. We had lost a mutual friend, and he had no one else to talk to. He was a musician. He'd lost several of his bandmates.
Mm.
Um, and no one, the losses from last spring were not even accompanied by memorial services. It was just they're gone.
Yeah, I mean, I just heard last night of, very dear friend of mine, 86 years old, passed, her son, we refer to each other as, big sis and little brother. And, when he called me, it just tore me up because he's like, oh God, I spoke to so many people, but now that I'm speaking to you,
Hmm.
now I just feel better. It was just, I've known him like most of his life. My mother taught his brother when he was in kindergarten, so our families go back so far. We went to the same church, and
Mhm.
um, she would have Thanksgiving, tell my daughter to come over. I'm making her turnips. She made the best turnips, and you look at that and say, well, it's just you and your immediate family. You've got your sons and your grandkids, and then you want me to come. You know how special that made me feel,
Mhm.
and it's just devastating what this is doing to people. And I don't know, it's like you don't want to wish harm on people, but you kind of want to wish that somebody really, really close that would totally devastate somebody would just get extremely sick or die in these people households who's not paying attention, so that
Mhm.
they could really feel the wrath. Because it's one
Mhm.
thing to lose a good friend, but you lose your mother or your child or somebody, a really close relative that will tear you apart and make you open your eyes. Is that what has to happen for people to get this?
Mhm.
I don't even understand. I don't understand the thought of somebody trying to squeeze into a little elevator with you maskless, or get angry when the store owner refuses to admit you, or once you get in, you take your mask down. They say you have to pull your mask up. You want to create a ruckus. I don't understand what it's going to take for these people.
Mhm.
You know, I like the fact that our president Joe Biden, has decided we're going to at least fly the flags half mast, for 5 days in recognition each day for 100,000 people.
Mhm.
They at least recognize what the past people wouldn't even recognize. That people are dead, they're not coming back. Families still have not buried their loved ones from the beginning of this pandemic. Some of them still don't know where their loved ones are.
Mhm. You know, 20 years ago this year, you know, we lost maybe 3,500 people in 9/11,
Hmm.
and the country went into a state of, shock and mourning. And then this past year, we got to a point where we were losing the equivalent of a 9/11 every day,
Every day.
and people acted like it wasn't happening. Um, it's how we got to this place is still something we scratch our heads on. Um, Thankfully, we're at a point where we're seeing the numbers go down. I think we finally gotten back to numbers that are comparable to like October in terms of number of infections and number of deaths, and there's definitely been a downward spiral of numbers, from January. Funny, I think the peak was around the time that those idiots were crawling up the side of the Capitol
Yeah.
without masks. Um,
Roaches.
yeah, absolutely. So there's really, I didn't want to even really focus that much on news today because I felt like today's episode should really just be about honoring the people who lost their lives. I wanted to also just take time to just look at some of the people who have passed, and as we have our conversation, this was from the city, and they've had a memorial site up, and they only got maybe about 10% of the people who have lost their lives in the city, but it's important that we just take a little bit and acknowledge some of them and recognize that every one of these almost 29,000 people here in the city and almost 50,000 people in the state and over 500,000 people in the country represent much more because each of those people touch the lives of so many other people. And, there, 500,000 families who are suffering, half a million, neighborhoods and, you know, half a million churches and half a million schools and half a million businesses that are all, suffering this, you know, senseless loss of life. And not to say that we wouldn't have had, some level of loss of life, but, had we had a coordinated response to this thing, it wouldn't have been this high. And we look at how China dealt with it, how other countries were able to respond and have a coordinated effort and keep the numbers from ballooning, and fight ignorance. And we didn't do any of that. And, so we're still trying to find our way through this thing.
Every time I think about the comparison between what they look like in China and hazmat suits, their medical staff, and I saw our staffs, wearing garbage bags and, just it was just an atrocity.
Hmm.
No really effective face coverings, no N95s, none of that when they was telling us not to buy them so that they would be available for medical personnel, which also included cleanup staff, the hazmat people, the dietary people, whoever was in the hospital needed to be fully equipped and with PPE. And to see them wearing trash bags to go in to deal with the deadliest disease that we've seen in the 20th century, 21st century, it was just like, oh my God, oh my God, what are we doing here?
Hmm.
What are we doing here? We can't even protect the people who's literally putting their lives on the line, who are staying away from their families for months so that
Hmm.
they won't pass this on to them. I mean, but I figure like if you're so selfish that you can't think about the people that's around you, protecting the people around you. This is a we disease. We have to work together. So if you can't be so bothered with protecting them, then I know it doesn't matter to you about the other people that are
Hmm.
fighting to save lives. And it could be possibly be yours one day. Just because you didn't get it doesn't mean you won't get it.
Hmm.
Now with the variants and different things like that going on, I mean, what can you really say? What I would like to do at this moment, what we do when Harlem Emergency Network meets before a meeting, a training, or whatever, we always take a moment of silence,
Absolutely.
and I'd like everyone to join us, you know, in a moment of silence for the lives lost, the people who are still suffering, for the families who are suffering loss, for the families who still have yet to bury their loved ones, still don't know where their loved ones are. And that itself is so weird to be living in, this society, and a year later, you don't know where your loved one is that has died from this disease. Thank you.
So I just feel like we should end here. Um, there is, there's no new news that is earth shaking. I can't wait for our next broadcast, but um, I just, you know, I am glad that we have had the opportunity to share information that helped save some lives. We've shared PPE. We've shared tactics on how to protect yourself, and we'll continue to do that. Um, I am I'm honored to see how so many people in our community have banded together to just work together to get through this, whether it be through distributing PPE or even distributing food, which is still needed, and people, risk their lives to be out to be able to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to eat even during this pandemic. Um, and at the same time, we have had to take the role of being critical of our governmental response. We've still been able to spot systemic racism rearing its ugly head and showing up in the delivery of services or lack thereof in the communities that are hardest hit, and we will continue to spot these inequities and speak out for them and point them out, even as we have continued to work hand in hand with many of those same agencies to get better responses. We will never stop being critical when we see the inequities, and we still have a lot of things that will need to be addressed in the coming days, weeks, and months, as we continue to try to rebound and recover from this. And so, while the news is optimistic in terms of the trends, we've seen the numbers go down and come back up again. And so, we have to continue our vigilance against this pandemic. We have to continue to work together as a community.
Yeah, and it's going to get warmer, and people are going to become more lax. And we can't afford that. We really cannot afford that.
Mhm.
You know, if 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 you had gatherings before, with the the temperature test, and that wasn't working, and now with these different variants, not knowing what they're capable of doing, um, not knowing if antibodies will protect you against that. You just gotta remain careful. We've just got to remain careful, and again, I want to say that we got to look out for each other. But it's the community. The community always works. It's like when you break that down, community is come in unity. We work together. Nothing, no emergency that takes place, the response cannot be effective unless other people in the community step in and help each other out. And oftentimes, it's those emergencies that bring people together. These are people that you've never met that's lived next door, down the block, around the corner. You've never met before. But when an emergency hits, the community is your most vital resource, where people just step out and step in wherever and however they can. You know, we were both CERT members under New York City Emergency Management, which was Community Emergency Response Team. Those teams were created because in California, when they had the earthquakes, they realized that tens of thousands of people's lives were saved because of strangers. People just stepped in and helped strangers survive. I'll never forget the story of how people made a human chain to get to a car that was teetering on a piece of asphalt that was hanging over the ocean. The car was teetering on that asphalt. And all of these strangers, none of them knew each other. One just started it off, and they created a human chain to get down to pluck that man from that car within moments before that car plunged into the ocean. It was rescues like that where people sacrificed life and limb. They didn't think about themselves. They didn't think about not returning to their families. They didn't think about anything. They just saw that a human life was in the balance, and they stepped in and they did what they needed to do to help people get through this. That's how we started. It was those kind of things that started that search.
Mhm.
And it's that same response that has allowed us to survive during this time. So I want to thank everyone from the least to the most, your contributions during this year. Donating money that you didn't have, people were spending their food stamps, which are not plentiful, to buy groceries and stuff to contribute to pantries. People may have had 4 coats, maybe 2 coats and 2 jackets, and they donated a coat and a jacket to a coat drive. People went out and served food, whatever they could do. They stepped out and they did it. And they did it with a smile, and they did it thankfully and with gratitude because they had survived. Because they knew they may have been eating sandwiches for the rest of the week, but you had people out there that didn't have anything to eat. And they stepped up and gave their time and their hearts. And I just want to give a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you, every organization that stepped up, every church organization that stepped up. Whoever you are, you know what you did. And I just want to say thank you.
So, what I think I'm going to do, as we end the broadcast, is to just go out. We saw this once before. It was a tribute that the MTA put together for the MTA workers who were lost to this pandemic, and so I think it would be appropriate for us to just play that.